They say time heals all wounds. But what if the wound was never allowed to bleed? What if it stayed buried, festering beneath your ribs for 50 years, hidden behind Sunday smiles and polite nods? My name is Gail Roberts. I'm 74 years old, and I live in a quiet little cottage on the edge of Beaufort, South Carolina. Folks around here know me as Miss Gail, the woman with the hydrangeas in full bloom every spring, and the old black and white photographs framed neatly on her porch wall. No one would ever guess that behind those photographs lies a truth I've never dared to tell. Until now, for decades, I tucked this story away like a cursed letter I was too afraid to open. I played the role of the faithful wife, the loyal neighbor, the church-going woman who knew how to bake a peach cobbler from scratch. But late at night, when the breeze slipped through the cracks in the windows and the cicadas sang their secrets, I would lie awake, haunted by something I never should have kept to myself. I was married to Raymond Roberts for nearly 38 years. He was a tall man with a square jaw and a southern drawl that softened the hardest of words. He served in Vietnam, came back with scars no one could see, and tried his best to live a quiet life after the war. We met at a summer church revival in 1971. He was 26. I was 22. He asked to walk me home that night, and a year later, we said our vows under the magnolia tree in my parents' backyard. Raymond came with baggage, like any man back from war, but he also came with a best friend, Dean Walker. They'd grown up just a few blocks from each other, played football together at Beaufort High, and served in the same infantry unit overseas. Dean was the kind of man who filled a room without trying loud, charming in that rough-edged kind of way, and always with a bottle in his hand. Raymond loved him like a brother, and so I, by extension, learned to keep a seat for him at our dinner table. Even on the nights I wished he wouldn't show up, Dean was around a lot. Too much, really. At first, it seemed harmless, just two old war buddies clinging to memories and drowning them in bourbon. I'd pour the drinks, laugh at their stories, clean the empty glasses, and kiss my husband goodnight while Dean passed out on the couch. But deep down, something always felt off. Maybe it was the way Dean's eyes lingered too long when I brought out the dishes. Maybe it was the way his hand would graze mine when it didn't need to. Or maybe it was how his compliments always hovered just above the line of appropriate dripping with something I didn't have the words to name back then. I remember the first time I mentioned it to Raymond. It was a Sunday evening in the fall. The leaves were turning, the church bells had just rung, and we were folding laundry on the bed. I said something like, "Dean gets real handsy when he's had a drink." Raymond chuckled and said, "That's just Dean. He don't mean nothing by it." And I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to believe him, because it was easier than imagining that a man we trusted could be something else entirely. Back then, women didn't talk about things like that. We were taught to keep our mouths shut, our skirts neat, and our marriages intact. My mother used to say, "A good wife knows when to hold her tongue." I wore that advice like armor, not realizing it was cutting me from the inside. But the truth is, something did happen, something awful, and it happened in the very home where I was supposed to feel safest. This story isn't about vengeance or hatred. It's about silence, the kind that eats away at you until you no longer recognize the sound of your own voice. I'm telling it now because I don't want to leave this world with the weight of what I never said. Not because I expect sympathy, but because maybe there's another woman out there who needs to hear it. If you're listening, this is for you, because even at 74, I've learned one thing. The truth doesn't expire. When I look back at my early years with Raymond, I often wonder if I painted it prettier than it really was. Maybe that's what we do when we're young, and in love we soften the edges, blur the red flags, and convince ourselves that everything will settle with time. I met Raymond Roberts when I was 22 at the Summer Revival in 1971. I had just finished my nursing certification at the local community college and was helping my aunt serve lemonade in the churchyard. Raymond came up with his friend Dean and said, "That smile of yours could stop a war." I blushed. Back then, I didn't know how many wounds lay behind that flirty southern charm. Raymond was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a quiet strength about him. He didn't talk much about the war, just said, "Some things are better left over there." But he was polite, attentive, and made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. We courted for about a year, picnics by the water, walks through Spanish moss-lined paths, dinners at my parents' place in town. He brought my mama flowers every Sunday, and she declared he was a real gentleman. We married in July of 1972 under the big magnolia tree behind my parents' home in Beaufort. I wore a lace dress my sister helped me stitch by hand, and Raymond cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. It was a simple wedding, just family, neighbors, and the old pastor from First Baptist. Dean was the best man, of course. I remember he toasted us with whiskey in one hand and a cigar in the other, slurring through a speech about how lucky Raymond was to land a fox like Gail. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. I told myself he was just drunk and trying to be funny. But even then, there was a strange flicker in his eyes that made me feel like I was being measured, not celebrated. We settled into a little house on Ladies Island, just across the bridge from Beaufort. Raymond took a job at the shipyard, and I started nursing at the county clinic. Life was quiet, but good, at least on the surface. Raymond was a decent man, but the war had carved something out of him. Some nights he'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. Other times he'd sit on the porch in silence for hours, staring at the water like he was trying to remember where he was. Dean, meanwhile, was a near constant presence. He worked part-time at a construction company and lived in a run-down trailer near the marsh. He never married, never seemed to settle. He'd come by on weekends, usually with a six-pack in hand and that crooked grin of his. Sometimes Raymond would invite him to stay the night when he got too drunk to drive. He'd crash on our couch, snoring loud enough to rattle the windows. At first, I didn't mind. I understood that Raymond needed someone who shared his past. Dean was the only one who could speak that unspoken language of foxholes and firefights. They'd sit together on the porch, passing a bottle back and forth, talking low and rough. I'd bring out cold drinks or dinner, trying to be the good wife Mama raised me to be. I kept my voice sweet, my dress neat, and my opinions tucked behind my teeth. But there were signs, small, creeping things that I brushed off again and again, like the time Dean accidentally brushed against me in the kitchen, his hand lingering just a second too long at my waist, or when he leaned in too close while I was washing dishes, whispering something crude that made my stomach tighten. I told Raymond once, lightly, like it was a joke, "Your friend's got a wandering eye." He laughed and said, "Dean, he flirts with anything in a skirt." Don't take him seriously. So I didn't. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was all in my head. That's what being a woman felt like back then. You second-guessed your instincts, especially when the man in question was someone your husband trusted. You didn't want to be the nagging wife, didn't want to stir the pot or make a scene, so you played along, smiled politely, and swallowed the unease. Dean wasn't always drunk. Sometimes he was even charming. He'd bring Raymond old photographs from their army days, or hand me a book he thought I'd like always, with a sly smile and eyes that scanned me too slowly. He knew when to act decent and when to push just far enough to make me question myself. Looking back now, I wonder if Raymond saw it and chose not to see. Or maybe he was just too broken, too tired, too ashamed to admit that his best friend might be capable of something vile. I wanted to believe our little life, the house, the porch, the dinners together, was solid, that Raymond would protect me, that the love we shared was enough to keep the cracks from spreading. But cracks, when ignored, always find a way to widen, and mine were just beginning to show. It was a Saturday in late June, hot, heavy, with that South Carolina kind of humidity that makes your clothes stick to your skin and the air smell like salt and jasmine. Raymond had invited Dean over to help with fixing the back fence, and by sunset, both men were shirtless, sweaty, and halfway through a bottle of whiskey. I remember the sound of their laughter echoing through the backyard, thick and slurred, like boys playing grown-up games they never truly left behind. I made sweet tea and set out plates of cold fried chicken, corn on the cob, and a blueberry pie I'd baked that morning. Dean slapped my backside playfully when I leaned down to pick up a napkin. Raymond saw it and laughed. "She's still got it," Dean said with a wink. "You're a lucky man, Ray." I wanted to say something. I wanted to throw the pie in his face, but instead, I smiled, that trained, polite Southern woman's smile, and I went back inside to breathe. Raymond passed out early that night, sprawled sideways on the bed with his arm over his eyes, shoes still on. Dean stayed behind, saying he'd sleep on the couch like usual. I gave him a pillow and a folded blanket, trying to keep my distance, trying to pretend I wasn't shaking. I locked our bedroom door that night. I remember the way the key clicked in the old brass lock. I even pushed a chair under the knob just in case. But somewhere around 2 a.m., I woke up to the creak of floorboards and the sound of my name, slurred and low, right outside the door. "Gail, come on. Open up. I just want to talk." I froze under the covers. My heart slammed against my chest, so loud I thought he might hear it through the door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I prayed to God that he'd just walk away. Then the handle turned. Once. Twice. And then nothing. I waited in that silence for what felt like hours. Finally, I heard the sound of footsteps stumbling down the hall. I told myself maybe he'd passed out in the living room. Maybe it was over. But it wasn't. A few minutes later, the sound of glass shattering in the kitchen jolted me again. I sat up in bed, listening, heart pounding in my throat. Damn it. I heard Dean curse loudly. "Where's the damn light?" Then suddenly, a bang against the bedroom door, then another. The chair scraped, toppled over, the lock gave way. And there he was. He reeked of whiskey and sweat, shirtless, barefoot, his eyes glassy, but full of something dark. He stumbled toward me, muttering, "Don't make this difficult, sweetheart. You're too pretty to pretend you don't like the attention." I screamed. I kicked. I clawed. But I was no match for him. He pinned me down with the strength of a man twice my size. And I remember the way he laughed when I begged him to stop, as if my pain was a punchline. I can still feel the weight of his breath on my cheek, the scratch of his stubble against my skin. I remember biting my own tongue just to stop myself from screaming too loud, because Raymond was asleep, just feet away, and I still wanted to believe he could protect me. When it was over, Dean staggered back down the hallway and passed out on the couch like nothing happened. I locked the door again. This time, I pushed the dresser in front of it. I curled up on the floor in the corner of the bedroom, unable to lie in the bed where Raymond still snored, unaware or unwilling to hear what had just happened in the next room. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to forget what my body wouldn't let me. In the morning, Raymond woke up complaining of a headache and asked why the dresser had been moved. I told him I thought I heard something outside. He chuckled and said, "Must have been raccoons again," then walked out to make coffee. Dean was already gone. The couch was still warm, and the blanket was folded neatly on the armrest, just like nothing happened. That morning, I stood in the shower for nearly an hour, scrubbing my skin until it turned red. I washed my hair 3 times. I brushed my teeth until my gums bled. But I couldn't wash away what he took from me. And the worst part, I said nothing. I told no one, not even Raymond, because I didn't know how. Who would believe that a man like Dean Walker, a decorated veteran, a best friend to my husband, could do such a thing? Who would believe me just the housewife with the sweet tea and the tidy porch? Back then, there was no hotline, no therapist downtown, no counselor at church. There was only shame and silence. So I carried it. I tucked it away like a rotting secret in the back of my mind. I dressed it up with lipstick and church dresses. I smiled at barbecues and brought casseroles to neighbors. And all the while, a part of me had gone cold. That night changed everything, but no one knew. Not yet. After that night, nothing in the house felt safe anymore. Not the soft hum of the morning kettle, not the sound of Raymond's boots by the door, and certainly not the sight of Dean's truck pulling into our driveway every few weeks, like clockwork, as if the world hadn't been turned upside down and left me in the wreckage. He came back just 12 days later. Raymond said Dean was helping him dig a trench for drainage in the backyard, and I stood there nodding like it was nothing, like I hadn't been brutalized by the same man less than 2 weeks earlier in that very home. I smiled. I waved politely. I brought out sweet tea. That was the beginning of what I now call my years of disappearance, because that's what happened to me. I disappeared inside my own skin. I became a ghost that cooked meals, kissed her husband goodbye every morning, paid the bills, and kept every curtain tightly drawn. I never told Raymond. I couldn't. Part of me was afraid he wouldn't believe me. The other part was terrified that he would. And then what would he kill Dean? Would he leave me? Would he say it was my fault? Would he tell me to get over it? I didn't know which of those outcomes scared me more. So I did what so many women did back then. I stayed quiet. Dean. Meanwhile, acted like nothing had ever happened. He'd laugh with Raymond, toss a football in the yard, ask me how work was going. He even started bringing little gifts, a bottle of wine, a new cookbook, earrings he said matched my eyes. It was twisted, nauseating, and yet no one but me could see it for what it was. He knew I wouldn't speak. And I hated him for being right. It didn't happen every time he visited, but enough to steal sleep from me, enough to make me flinch when Raymond touched my arm, enough to turn my own house into a prison where I couldn't even scream. I started making excuses to avoid being alone with Dean. If Raymond invited him for dinner, I'd conveniently pick up an evening shift at the clinic. If they planned a fishing trip and Dean was set to spend the night, I'd visit my sister in Charleston for the weekend, even when I just stayed in a motel with the curtains drawn. Still, he found ways. One time, Dean showed up unannounced while Raymond was still at work. Said he just wanted to drop off some tools. I knew better. I locked the screen door and wouldn't let him in. He stared at me through the mesh for a long time, then laughed. "You know," he said, "Raymond wouldn't like you being so cold to his best friend. That night, I made myself throw up, not because I was sick, but because I had to feel in control of something, anything. The emotional toll began to show in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. I lost weight. My hands trembled when I tried to pour coffee. I forgot appointments, misplaced keys, burned dinners. Raymond asked if I was going through the change. I said yes, and he patted my hand, told me to just write it out. Some nights, I'd wake up from nightmares so vivid I'd have to check the door, the lock, the closet, just to reassure myself that I wasn't back in that moment. The worst dreams were the ones where I screamed and no one came. Not Raymond, not neighbors, not even God. I felt invisible. One afternoon, I sat in the back pew at church and watched the sunlight filter through the stained glass like God himself was listening. I wanted so badly to confess, not just the event, but the shame, the anger, the confusion. I remember gripping the wooden bench until my knuckles turned white, tears streaming down my face as the choir sang, "Come ye sinners." But I didn't walk to the altar, because what could I say? Forgive me, Lord, for letting it happen again. Forgive me for hating him. Forgive me for hating myself. I began to lose myself in my work at the clinic. I took on extra shifts, stayed late, even worked holidays. Caring for others helped me avoid caring about myself. In those sterile white rooms, I was Nurse Gail, not the woman haunted by a man who moved freely in her life like he owned it. People started to notice I looked tired. My friend June asked me once, "Gail, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself lately." And I smiled because I had trained myself to smile and said, "Just tired, hun. That's all." But I wasn't just tired. I was eroding. Even Raymond began to fade from me. He was never an expressive man, but over time, the distance between us became a quiet chasm. We stopped touching except in passing. Conversations became functional grocery lists, utility bills, repairs. He never asked why I pulled away. He never noticed that I no longer met his eyes in bed, or that I flinched when he hugged me from behind. Maybe he didn't want to know, or maybe I had trained him not to ask. The abuse didn't stop. It only changed shape. Sometimes it was physical. Sometimes it was the fear, the lingering threat, the smile Dean gave me when no one else was looking. Sometimes it was just the memory, replaying itself uninvited. I couldn't leave. Where would I go? What would I say? This was my life now. A house with no doors, a marriage full of silence, a woman slowly disappearing inside herself, and no one saw it. No one ever does until it's too late. It had been nearly 6 years since the first night Dean violated me. 6 years of silence. 6 years of trying to forget, to minimize, to survive. By then, I was 30, and the weight of what I had been carrying had carved itself into every part of me. My shoulders hunched, my voice grew soft, and even the way I walked quick, cautious, watchful, spoke to the fear that never left me. One Saturday evening in August, Raymond invited Dean over for a fish fry. I said I wasn't feeling well. He waved me off. "Just go lie down for a bit," he said. "You don't have to play hostess." That night, something in me snapped. I stood in the bathroom, brushing my hair like I always did before bed. I stared at myself in the mirror. Not a wrinkle yet, but I looked old, like the joy had been siphoned out of me and replaced with something tight and bitter. That's when I heard the front door open and Dean's voice echo through the house. "Heard you missed me, sweetheart." I froze. My hand gripped the edge of the sink so hard I thought the porcelain would crack. I didn't go out to say hello. I didn't bring out drinks. I stayed locked in the bathroom until I heard them laughing out back, the grease popping in the fryer, the distant rhythm of cicadas rising with the heat. Later that night, I lay in bed pretending to sleep when Raymond came in, smelling of fried fish and beer. He sat at the edge of the bed and said, "Dean thinks you don't like him anymore." I didn't respond. He let out a sigh. "Did something happen between you two?" The room went still. My whole body stiffened. I said nothing. "Gail," he pressed, "did he ever do anything you can tell me?" There it was, the door I thought would never open, but I couldn't walk through it. Not yet. I rolled over, back turned to him, and muttered, "I'm just tired. Ray, that's all." He didn't push again. He stood up, muttered something about women and moods, and went to watch TV in the living room. But I knew. He knew something. He just didn't want to see it, and I wasn't ready to make him. I almost did the next morning. Raymond had left for the store, and I was watering the garden when Dean pulled up uninvited. I could smell the bourbon on his breath, even from the porch. He leaned against the railing like he owned the place and said, "Still playing hard to get after all these years." I stepped back. "You need to leave." He laughed. "You always liked pretending you didn't want it. That's what made it fun." I felt something inside me snap. Maybe it was rage. Maybe it was years of shame twisting into something sharper. Whatever it was. I grabbed the garden shears and pointed them straight at his chest. "You come near me again, and I swear to God, Dean, I will gut you like the fish you and Raymond caught last night. Do you hear me for a second?" He looked stunned. Then he smiled. "You won't tell him," he said softly. "You never do." And with that, he turned and walked away, like he hadn't just poured gasoline on a fire that had been smoldering for years. But that time he was wrong. That same evening, Raymond found me crying in the kitchen. Not quiet tears. Not the kind you wipe away quickly and pretend were from cutting onions. No. These were the kind of sobs that rack your whole body. The kind you've been holding back so long that they come out like a storm finally given permission to break. He dropped the groceries on the floor and came to me, panicked. "What's wrong, Gail? What's going on?" And I told him everything, every disgusting word, every night, every violation. I told him about the broken lock, the silence, the fear, the motel rooms, the shame, the way I thought he'd hate me if I said it. And when I finished, I braced myself for disbelief. But Raymond didn't speak. He didn't touch me, didn't yell, didn't cry. He just stood there, pale and quiet, like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. Finally, he asked one question. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I couldn't answer that, not in a way that made sense to him. How do you explain the shame of being violated by someone your husband calls brother? How do you explain the way fear eats your voice until silence feels safer than truth? He left the house that night without another word. Just grabbed his keys and drove off. I didn't know where. I sat on the kitchen floor until the sun came up. When he came back the next morning, his hands were scraped and his knuckles bruised. He didn't tell me what happened, but I knew. Dean never came around again. Raymond never said his name again. But that didn't mean everything was fixed. The air between us was different now. Heavy, fragile. We coexisted in the same space, but we were no longer the couple under the magnolia tree. That innocence had died, and in its place stood two broken people trying not to shatter further. Raymond blamed himself, though he never said it outright. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He drank more. He worked longer hours. And me, I started to feel the aftermath I had buried for years come roaring to the surface. It wasn't over. It had only just begun. After I told Raymond the truth, it was like we both vanished in plain sight. We still lived in the same house. We still ate at the same table, but we didn't really see each other anymore. Raymond didn't speak of Dean again, not once. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer comfort. He just retreated, and I didn't blame him, not completely. Raymond had built his life on the belief that he could keep me safe, that whatever haunted him from the war, he could at least protect his wife from the evil in the world. But Dean hadn't just betrayed me. He'd shattered Raymond's last illusion of control. He came home from work later and later. Some nights, he'd fall asleep on the porch with a half-finished bottle of Jack beside him. Other nights, I'd wake to the sound of him crying softly in the hallway, not knowing I could hear him. We were two broken souls circling each other, afraid that speaking would make it all too real again. So instead, we went silent. At church, people still saw us as the faithful couple. Gail and Raymond, the ones who helped organize the fall potluck and brought flowers for the altar. No one knew the truth, sitting between us like a third shadow. And I turned inward. I threw myself into my work at the clinic. I took double shifts, volunteered for the county health van, visited elderly patients on weekends. It was easier to tend to other people's wounds than face my own. I began spending more time at the dock behind our house. There was an old wooden bench out there, just past the cattails, where I used to sit with Raymond in the early years. But now I went alone. I'd sit there until the stars came out, staring at the water until the moonlight made it shimmer like glass. I didn't cry much anymore. The tears had dried into something colder, something heavier. There were moments, small ones, where I tried to reconnect with Raymond. I'd make his favorite casserole, iron his shirts, even suggest we go out for dinner like we used to. But he always declined, gently, like a man turning away from a ghost he couldn't bear to look at. One night, nearly a year after I told him, I found a note tucked into my Bible. It was his handwriting, neat, careful, like always. I'm sorry I wasn't who you needed. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I don't know how to fix this, Gail. I just want you to be okay. R. I held that note to my chest and wept for the first time in months. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from him, and maybe the most honest thing he ever gave me. 2 weeks later, he had his first heart attack. It happened while he was mowing the front yard. I saw him collapse from the kitchen window and ran barefoot across the grass screaming his name. I called 911, held his head in my lap while we waited, begged God not to take him yet. He survived, but it changed everything. Raymond came home from the hospital quieter than ever. He moved slower, ate less, and spent most of his time on the porch staring at nothing. I brought him his coffee, read aloud from the newspaper, tried to pull him back to life, but it was like he'd already left. In the stillness, I realized something painful. He was fading, and I had to decide if I'd let myself fade with him. That fall, I signed up for a writing workshop at the senior center It was nothing fancy, just a group of women who met every Thursday morning with notebooks and shaky hands. But it was the first time I'd done something just for me in decades. I didn't tell anyone what I wrote about at first. I started with recipes, old family stories, memories of my childhood. But eventually, the truth crept in. One day, I read a piece aloud. I didn't use real names, but everyone knew it was about someone who had been hurt by a friend. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then a woman named Lillian reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "That happened to me too," she whispered. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. I kept going back, week after week. I wrote, I shared, I cried, and slowly, I began to breathe again. Not the shallow survival kind, but the deep, soul-filling breath of a woman remembering who she used to be. Raymond noticed. He'd look at me as I left the house with my notebook and thermos, then look away. One day, he asked, "Where do you go every Thursday?" I looked him in the eye for the first time in months and said, "Somewhere I can tell the truth." He nodded, just once, then looked out at the water. That was the last real conversation we had. Raymond passed away the following spring, 2 days before his 67th birthday. He went in his sleep, quiet, still, alone in our bed. I didn't cry when I found him. I just sat beside him, held his hand, and whispered, "You were a good man. You just didn't know how to carry both our pain." At the funeral, Dean didn't show up. He was still alive. I'd heard from someone that he was living out in Bluffton, but he didn't dare come near. And I didn't mourn that loss one bit. After Raymond was gone, I found myself standing in the middle of our empty living room with decades of silence behind me and the rest of my life ahead of me. And for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't afraid of it. After Raymond passed, the silence in the house changed. It wasn't the kind of silence that haunted me anymore. It was clean, still, peaceful, even. For the first time in decades, I could walk from room to room without flinching at the sound of a door creaking open. I could sleep with the windows open, let the breeze in, let the cicadas sing. But more than that, I could breathe in my own skin. For a while, I didn't know what to do with that freedom. I was 70 years old. Most folks my age were slowing down, spending time with grandchildren, going on cruises. But I had no children, no cruises, no plans. All I had was a story and a voice that had been locked away for so long, it almost forgot how to speak. So I wrote. Every morning, I'd rise with the sun, sit at the old kitchen table, and fill page after page of yellow legal pads. I wrote about the girl I used to be, the woman I became, the nights I didn't sleep, and the mornings I forced myself to smile. I wrote about Raymond, how I loved him, how he failed me, and how we both lived in the shadow of a man who never deserved a place at our table. Some days I cried. Some days I laughed bitterly at things that once broke me. And one day, I gathered up the courage to share it. I printed out one of my pieces, the one about the night Dean first broke into my room, and brought it to the writing group at the senior center. I could barely read the words aloud. My voice trembled, my hands shook, and for a moment, I thought I'd faint from the weight of it. But when I finished, there was no judgment, no awkward silence. Just a room full of women, some nodding slowly, others with tears in their eyes. Lillian, the same woman who once said that happened to me too, leaned forward and said softly, "You should share this, Gail. Not just with us, with others." I didn't know what she meant at first, but by spring, I did. With the help of a young counselor from the local shelter, I began volunteering at the Women's Resource Center in Beaufort. At first, I just helped with the front desk, answered phones, made coffee, folded brochures, but slowly, they asked me to do more join support circles, talk to women who had come in bruised, broken, scared. At first, I thought I had nothing to offer, but then I sat across from a woman mid-30s, 2 kids, shaking like a leaf, and told her, "I know what it's like to be hurt by someone your husband trusts." And she looked up at me, eyes wide. That's when I understood. I didn't have to be a therapist. I didn't have to have all the answers. I just had to be honest. In that honesty, I saw women lean in, open up, heal. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was someone who had walked through hell and come out with her name still intact. Gail Roberts. I said it with pride now. One evening, I was asked to speak at a community event hosted by the center, an awareness night for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. There were chairs set up in the park, fairy lights strung across trees, and a small podium beneath the stars. When I stepped up to speak, I looked out and saw dozens of faces, young and old, men and women, black and white. Some I recognized, most I didn't. I took a deep breath and said, "My name is Gail Roberts. I am 72 years old, and for most of my life, I didn't believe my voice mattered. I was wrong. Then I told them everything. And when I finished, they clapped, not the kind of clapping that's polite or performative, but the kind that comes from people who know what it means to speak through pain. After the event, a woman in her 60s approached me. She didn't say much, just hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for saying what I never could." That night, I walked home with a heart heavier than ever, but not with sorrow, with truth. And truth, I'd learned, is weighty but holy. My little house became a safe haven, not just for me, but for others. Women would come by for coffee, for counsel, for comfort. Some just sat with me on the porch in silence. Others poured out years of secrets they'd never spoken aloud. I listened. I nodded. I held their hands. And sometimes, when they asked me how I ever found the strength to speak, I'd smile gently and say I waited too long. So now I speak so you don't have to wait. I wasn't the same woman who once flinched at footsteps in the hallway. I was a survivor, and I was no longer afraid of my own story. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet like most, when the letter arrived. I almost missed it, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a water bill. The envelope was cream-colored and stiff, addressed in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. There was no return address. I sat down at the kitchen table, my heart already tightening before I even tore it open. Something about the handwriting made my stomach churn. Inside was a short note written in blue ink, no greeting, no apology. Just 4 lines. I heard what you said at the park event. I never meant to hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I remember everything, too. Dean, I read it once, then again. Then I folded it slowly, as if careful hands might prevent it from detonating. Dean Walker, the man who had stolen my voice, my safety, and years of peace. Even after all this time, just seeing his name sent a chill through me. I stared at that letter for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel anger. What I felt strangely was certainty, a calm, clear knowing that I had one final thing left to do. I took out a blank piece of stationery from the drawer, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down to write. Dean, you don't deserve my forgiveness, and I'm not offering it. What you did to me will never be erased by a single line written on a piece of paper. I carried your violence inside my body for decades. I lived in fear. I doubted my worth. I lost so much time because of you. But here's what I need you to know. I no longer carry you with me. I spoke your name out loud to a crowd of people, and when I did, something broke free. The shame that wasn't mine, it's gone. The silence you forced me into, that's over. You don't own a piece of me anymore. Not even this letter gets to change that. Whatever guilt you feel, it's yours to live with. I'm not here to lessen it. I'm here to say goodbye. Gail Roberts. I didn't mail the letter. I burned it. Out by the dock. I held it in my hand until the flame turned it to ash. The wind carried the remains into the water, like scattered whispers. I stood there for a while, staring at the gentle ripples. It was over, not the memories, not the scars, but the hold. Later that evening, I told Lillian what had happened. She nodded and poured us both a glass of lemonade. You did the right thing, she said. Sometimes closure doesn't come from their apology. It comes from you deciding their power is done. She was right. Dean's words couldn't undo what he did, but my voice spoken, written, shared had undone the part of me that used to tremble at his name. That summer, I started mentoring younger women at the shelter, survivors in their 20s and 30s who reminded me so much of who I used to be. I told them my story, not because it was extraordinary, but because it wasn't. It was common, too common, and that's why it had to be told. One of them, a young mother named Brianna, told me one day, Miss Gail, when I hear you talk, I don't feel broken. I just feel unfinished. That line stayed with me, because maybe we never get back what we lost. Maybe the hurt doesn't vanish, but we get to finish our story the way we choose. And mine wasn't going to end with Dean's letter. It would end with me standing in truth, wrapped in peace, and knowing full well that I had not just survived. I had risen. I never thought I'd live to 74, not because of illness or danger, but because there were so many years where I wasn't really living at all. I was breathing, yes, moving, yes, but my soul was curled up tight in a corner, too afraid to step into the light. Now, when I sit on my porch in the morning, sipping coffee and watching the marsh come alive with birdsong, I feel something I never thought would find me again. Peace. It's not the loud, celebratory kind. It's quiet, gentle, like an old friend that finally came home. I've come to understand that healing doesn't look like forgetting. It looks like remembering without breaking. It's reading your own story and no longer feeling shame for the chapter you didn't write. And Lord, I didn't write what Dean did, but I wrote what came next. I wrote the truth. I spoke it. I lived it. After Raymond died, I found a photograph of us from our early days, me in a white dress, him in his army greens, both of us too young to understand how much life would test us. I framed it and placed it on the bookshelf above my desk. Not because I want to remember the pain, but because I want to remember that even in all the darkness, there were moments of love, of goodness, of effort. Raymond wasn't a perfect man. He failed me when I needed him most, but he also gave me the space, at the end, to find myself again. I honor both truths. At the Women's Center, the younger volunteers call me Miss Gail the Listener. I like that. I've learned that listening is one of the greatest gifts we can offer each other. Not fixing, not preaching, just being there. Every story I hear reminds me that my own wasn't a lonely exception. It was part of a long, painful pattern passed down through silence and fear, but not anymore, because now we speak, now we listen, and now we plant something better for the next woman who comes after us. I've started a little garden behind the center, tomatoes, herbs, sweet peas, and lavender. The women tend it together after group meetings, their hands in the soil, their voices rising with laughter and memory. We call it the quiet garden, not because we don't speak there, but because it's a place where no one has to explain why they're healing. They just do. And I sit on a bench beneath the willow tree and watch. Sometimes I cry. More often, I smile, because I never thought I'd get here, but I did. And that matters more than anything. If you're still listening, thank you. Thank you for walking with me through the darkest corners of my story, for sitting with me in the silence, in the fear, in the years I thought I had nothing left but shadows. You see, I spent most of my life believing I wasn't important, that what happened to me didn't matter as long as I kept the peace, kept the house clean, and kept my mouth shut. I thought silence made me strong. I was wrong. Silence didn't make me strong. It made me disappear. It wasn't until I found the courage to speak through tears, through shaking hands, through pages in a notebook that I began to reappear, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a whole woman who finally understood the power of her own truth. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from my story, it's this: you are never too old, too broken, or too late to begin again. It doesn't matter if you're 30 or 70 or somewhere in between. Your voice still matters. Your pain is still valid, and your healing is still possible. I used to think that healing meant forgetting, that I had to move on, erase it, never speak of it again. But healing is remembering and choosing to stand anyway. It's lighting a candle in the dark and saying, I'm still here. I've been many things in my life: a nurse, a wife, a woman silenced by fear. But now I'm a storyteller, a listener, a planter of gardens, and a builder of safe spaces. And in this final season of my life, I don't seek revenge. I seek meaning. If I could go back and speak to the younger me, the girl hiding behind the bathroom door, the woman curled up on the floor while her husband snored, the widow holding a letter from her abuser, I'd tell her this: you will not stay broken. You will not be forgotten. And one day, your story will set someone else free, because that's what stories do. They pass down courage. They whisper, you're not alone. And they remind us that no matter how much we've endured, we still get to choose how it ends. So here I am, choosing, speaking, and living. For those of you out there, maybe watching this with a heavy heart, maybe holding back tears, maybe remembering something you've tried hard to forget, I want to say you matter. You're not crazy, and you are not what someone did to you. If my voice reached you, if my journey stirred something inside you, don't let it stop here. Tell your story. Even if it's just a whisper right now, even if it's only to yourself, because every whisper adds up, and one day it becomes a voice strong enough to move mountains. There is no timeline on healing, no age limit on speaking up. Some wounds run deep, but truth, when spoken with courage, becomes the beginning of freedom. We are not defined by what broke us. We are defined by how we choose to rise. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below, share your thoughts, your memories, or just a quiet, I'm here. And if you believe stories like mine deserve to be told, please subscribe to the channel. Because together, when we listen, When we truly listen, we make space for healing to begin. Thank you for giving me your time, and thank you for letting me be heard.